Be me, Everly. I'm in my early 50s. My life, for the most part, has been a success story I wrote myself. I live in a nice, minimalist apartment with a great view of the city. White walls, lots of natural light. Everything is exactly where it should be. I'm a writer. I've published a few books and have a steady gig writing opinion pieces for a well-known online publication. My work focuses on social dynamics, female empowerment, and deconstructing the old, tired structures we all live under. It's important work. I get emails from women all over the country telling me I've given them a voice. I have a partner, a good man, or at least a man who is trying his best to be good. He's an architect, listens when I talk, and nods at all the right times. My social circle is tight, smart, and agrees with me on everything that matters. We have wine nights and talk about politics, art, and the exhausting reality of living in a world still so shaped by men. By all objective measures, my life is orderly, meaningful, and successful, except for the deafening silence that has consumed one corner of it. My son, Nova, who is 24, has not spoken to me in almost 4 months. It wasn't a dramatic fight with yelling and slammed doors. It was a quiet, clean break, like a rope being cut. One day he was my son, the next he was a stranger who shared my DNA. My texts go unread, my calls go straight to voicemail. I even sent him a letter, a real one, with a stamp. Nothing. My partner tells me to give him space. My friends tell me I did the right thing. But every morning, I wake up with this cold knot in my stomach. It all goes back to one evening late last summer, a Tuesday or a Wednesday, I think. It was raining. I remember the rain because it was making streaks on my big living room window, and I was thinking it looked like the city was crying, a silly, poetic thought. I was planning out my next article, something about the subtle ways men try to claim emotional space in conversations. Then my buzzer rang. It was Nova. He never visited unannounced. He was a creature of habit, my son. Always a text first. Hey, are you free this weekend? Or, can I call you after work? His impromptu arrival was the first sign that something was off. When I opened the door, he looked awful, not sick, but drained, like all the color had been leached out of him. His shoulders were slumped, and he was staring at the floor. He was holding a small, soggy paper bag that probably held some takeout he had no intention of eating. I let him in, trying to keep the annoyance out of my voice. I was on a deadline. I asked him what was wrong, if he needed money, if something had happened at his IT job. He just shook his head and mumbled, "No, nothing like that." He sat on my expensive gray sofa, the one I tell guests not to put their feet on, and just stared at the rain-streaked window. He looked so small in that big empty room. I made us some tea, trying to fill the silence with the mundane sounds of kettle and cup. I put the mug down in front of him and sat in the armchair opposite, my professional listening chair. I was ready to dispense some maternal wisdom, solve his problem in under an hour, and get back to my article. He finally started talking. It came out in a trickle at first. He said work was fine, his apartment was fine, everything was fine. But he said it with the voice of someone describing the weather on another planet. Then he looked at me, really looked at me for the first time that night, and his eyes were just hollow. He told me he was lonely. It wasn't the way a person says they're lonely when they just need a night out with friends. It was a deep, structural loneliness, the kind that gets into your bones. He described his life to me, a life I thought I knew, but clearly didn't. He talked about going to work, coming home, making dinner for one, watching something on a screen, and then going to bed, day after day. He said his friends were all pairing off, getting engaged, moving in with girlfriends. Their social circle was shrinking and changing into a collection of couples. He was being left behind. He tried, he said, he really tried. He talked about the dating apps, the endless swiping, hours spent crafting a profile, choosing the right pictures, trying to seem interesting but not trying too hard, all for nothing. A match here and there that would fizzle out after 3 messages. A date once every few months with someone who looked bored the entire time. He said he felt invisible, like he was behind a pane of glass, watching everyone else live their lives. He wasn't angry or bitter when he said it. He sounded defeated, resigned. He said, "I just don't know what's wrong with me, Mom. I'm a good person. I have a good job. I'm not a bad-looking guy. But it doesn't matter. It feels like I'm not even in the game." I listened, but as the words came out of his mouth, my mind was already working. I wasn't just his mother in that moment. I was a cultural analyst. I was hearing his personal pain, but I was filtering it through the lens of everything I'd written about. I saw the patterns, the social scripts, the male expectation. When he finished, he just sat there, looking into his tea as if the answers were at the bottom of the cup. He had opened up his chest and shown me the empty space inside. He was vulnerable. He was asking for his mother. And I gave him a lecture. I didn't mean for it to be a lecture. In my mind, I was helping him. I was giving him the tools to reframe his situation. I started by telling him that this feeling of loneliness was a common symptom of a society that teaches men they need a woman to feel complete. I suggested that instead of focusing on external validation from women, he should work on his own internal sense of self-worth. He just kept staring at his mug. He didn't say a word, so I kept talking. I was warming to my subject now. This was familiar territory. I explained that the dating market he found so frustrating was, in many ways, a reaction to centuries of men holding all the power. Women were finally in a position to choose freely, and that meant some men would inevitably feel left out. It was a societal correction, I said. I told him the feeling of being invisible was something women had dealt with for all of history, unless they were deemed young and beautiful enough to be visible to men. I think I even used the phrase, "Welcome to our world." He still didn't look at me. I could see the muscles in his jaw tightening. I felt a surge of self-righteousness. This was important. He needed to hear this. This was a teaching moment. I went on. I talked about toxic masculinity. I told him that the pressure he felt to be successful and find a partner was a cage men built for themselves. He didn't have to subscribe to it. He could be different. He could break free. He finally looked up. The hollow look was gone. It was replaced by something else, something cold and sharp. He said very quietly, "So what you're saying is, my feelings are wrong." I bristled at that. "I'm not saying they're wrong, Nova. I'm saying you need to examine where they come from. This sense of frustration you have, it's a form of entitlement. It's the expectation that you deserve a partner, and the world is being unfair by not providing one." And then I delivered the final blow, the line that I replayed in my head 1,000 times since. I looked at my sad, lonely son, and with all the detached wisdom of a gender studies textbook, I said, "You have no idea how much privilege you walk around with every single day. This frustration you're feeling, it's a taste of what it's like not to have everything handed to you. Maybe you should sit with that feeling for a while." That's when he changed. It wasn't sudden. It was a slow withdrawing. I watched him pull every part of himself away from me, retreating behind some wall deep inside his mind. The light in his eyes just went out. He stood up from the sofa. He didn't seem angry. He didn't seem hurt anymore. He just seemed done. He walked to the door, leaving his full mug of tea on my coffee table. He said, "Okay, I get it now." I asked him where he was going. He turned around and his face was a perfect mask of neutrality. It was the face of a polite stranger. "Home," he said. "Thanks for the tea." Then he left. I stood there in the silent apartment, the sound of the rain my only company. For a moment I felt a pang of something, regret, but I pushed it down. I told myself it was for the best. Tough love. He was an adult. He needed to learn to stand on his own 2 feet and not blame the world for his problems. I went back to my laptop and finished my article. It was a good one, sharp, insightful, and uncompromising. The next week, I sent him a text. "Hope you're feeling better. Let's get dinner soon." No reply. A week later, another text. "Are you still upset about our talk? That's a bit childish, don't you think?" Nothing. After a month of silence, I called him. It rang and rang, then went to voicemail. His voice on the recording sounded like a ghost from another life. I left a message. My voice was clipped, annoyed. I told him he was being incredibly immature and that I deserved the respect of a response. That was the last message I ever left him. I complained about it to my partner. He listened, nodded, and said, "He probably just needs some space. He'll come around." He was trying to be supportive, but he was useless. He didn't understand the dynamic. I had a much more productive conversation with my friend Sarah over lunch. Sarah is also a writer, even more uncompromising than I am. I told her the whole story, framing it as a case study in modern male fragility. She was completely on my side. She was indignant on my behalf. "You did absolutely nothing wrong," she said, stabbing a piece of arugula with her fork. "You gave him a perfectly rational, sociologically sound analysis of his situation, and he threw a tantrum because it wasn't what he wanted to hear. She said that men are conditioned to see women as emotional service providers. They come to us to fix their feelings, and when we offer a diagnosis instead of a bandage, they get angry. He wanted you to say, "Oh, you poor thing, the world is so mean to you," she scoffed. And you refused to play that role. Good for you. You maintained your intellectual integrity. Hearing her say it all back to me was incredibly validating. Yes, that was it. I hadn't been a bad mother. I had been a good feminist. Nova's reaction wasn't about me. It was about his own inability to confront the truth. Sarah and I spent the rest of the lunch talking about how exhausting it was to be the enlightened ones, constantly having to educate the men in our lives. I left that lunch feeling powerful and vindicated. My son's silence was no longer a source of pain. It was proof of my correctness. It was a badge of honor. For the next couple of months, I lived in that state of self-assured righteousness. I was busy with work. A new book proposal was accepted. My articles were getting thousands of shares. I did a podcast interview where I talked about the importance of setting emotional boundaries with the men in our lives, even our sons. I was at the top of my game. I barely thought about Nova, or if I did, it was with a kind of detached pity. I hoped he was doing the work and would eventually see that I had been right all along. I imagined him, months from now, calling me up and apologizing. "Mom, you were right. I was stuck in a bad mindset. Thank you for showing me the light." I would be gracious in my victory, of course, but that call never came. The first crack in my perfect world appeared on a Monday. It was an email from my editor, my longtime editor, a woman who had championed my work for years. The subject line was a change in direction. The email was full of corporate jargon, pivoting our brand, aligning with new voices, evolving the conversation. It took me 2 reads to understand what she was actually saying. They were letting me go. My column, my steady platform for the last decade, was being indefinitely paused. They were replacing me with a 22-year-old with a massive social media following who wrote exclusively in slang and memes about smashing the cishet patriarchy. I called my editor immediately. She sounded uncomfortable. I asked her why. Was it my numbers, my writing? No, of course not, she said quickly. Your work is foundational. It's just that, well, the discourse is moving on. Your perspective is seen as a bit dated. Dated? I was the one who helped build this discourse. She explained that my brand of feminism was considered too exclusionary by the new guard, too second wave, too focused on dynamics between men and women instead of the broader spectrum of identities. I was being made redundant by the very movement I had dedicated my life to. I felt a cold dread creep up my spine. It was the first time in my professional life I had ever felt irrelevant. I hung up the phone and just stared at my laptop screen, at the half-finished draft of my next column. It felt like a relic from a forgotten civilization. I told my partner about it that evening. He was sympathetic. He rubbed my back and said I was too talented to be held down for long. He told me it was their loss, but he didn't get it. It wasn't just about losing a job. It felt like my identity had been canceled. For the first time, I felt a flicker of what Nova might have felt, the feeling of being invisible, of the world moving on without you. I pushed the thought away. My situation was completely different. It was political. His was just personal. But the feeling lingered, a small, cold stone in the pit of my stomach. The next crack appeared a few weeks later. It involved my partner, the man who was supposed to be my safe harbor. I had been difficult to live with since I lost the column. I was moody, irritable, and constantly talking about the infantile state of modern activism. I was analyzing everything, turning our home into a constant seminar. I criticized the way he spoke, the movies he wanted to watch, the assumptions I believed were lurking behind his every word. I thought I was being sharp and observant. I realize now I was just being cruel. One evening, he came home from work and found me ranting about a new article written by my 22-year-old replacement. I was pacing around the living room, dissecting her simplistic arguments and terrible grammar. He just stood in the doorway watching me. He had a tired look on his face, the same one I'd seen on Nova. I didn't notice it at the time. When I finally paused for breath, he spoke. He said, "I can't do this anymore, Everly." I was stunned. "Do what? Listen to me have a thought?" "No," he said, and his voice was gentle, which somehow made it worse. "I can't live inside a think piece. I feel like I'm a character in one of your articles. The well-meaning but ultimately problematic man. You're not with me. You're observing me, judging me. It was absurd. I told him he was being overly sensitive, and then he said the words that shattered everything. It's just, I feel so lonely, even when you're right here. Loneliness, that word again. He said he was tired of being a symbol. He just wanted to be a person. He wanted a partner, not a critic. He told me he was moving out. He'd already found an apartment. He had it all planned. This wasn't a snap decision. This was a conclusion he had reached after months of feeling erased in his own home. I tried to argue. I tried to use logic. I tried to deconstruct his feelings and let's show him where they were coming from. I tried to do to him exactly what I had done to my son. He just shook his head. You see, you're doing it right now, he said. You're not listening. You're analyzing. He packed a bag that night and left. The apartment, once a symbol of my orderly success, suddenly felt cavernous and empty. The silence he left behind was a physical thing. It pressed in on me from all sides. I had lost my job and my partner in the space of a month. My carefully constructed world was crumbling, and I had no idea why. I did the only thing I could think of. I called Sarah. I needed my friend. I needed her to tell me I was right, that the world was wrong, that this was all just a temporary setback. I met her at our usual wine bar. I must have looked as bad as Nova did that night, because her first reaction was a shocked, "My God, what happened to you?" I told her everything. The column, my partner leaving. I cried. It was the first time I had cried in years. I expected her to wrap me in a hug, to pour me another glass of wine, and rail against the injustice of it all. But she didn't. She listened, yes, but she had a strange, distant look in her eyes. When I finished, she patted my hand awkwardly. "Well," she said, her voice lacking its usual fire. "That's a lot." I waited for the outrage on my behalf. It didn't come. Instead, she started talking about her own life, a new book deal she had just landed, a prestigious fellowship she was applying for. It was like she hadn't even heard me. I tried to bring the conversation back to my crisis. I said, "I just feel so alone right now." And then she said the most astonishing thing. She sighed, a little impatiently, and said, "Everly, you need to get some perspective. You're a successful woman. You have savings. You own your apartment. So your boyfriend left you and you lost the column. It's not the end of the world. You're strong. You'll be fine." She dismissed my pain. She minimized it, repackaged it, and handed it back to me as a minor inconvenience. She was treating me exactly, precisely, the way I had treated my son. The irony was so thick I could have choked on it. I just stared at her. This woman who had been my closest ally, my intellectual sparring partner, my friend. And I saw her for what she was. Not a friend, but a colleague. My pain was boring to her because it didn't fit the narrative. It was just a messy personal problem, and she had more important things to think about. I realized that our entire friendship was built on a shared ideology, not genuine human connection. The moment I needed a person instead of a political ally, she had nothing to offer me. I made an excuse and left. I walked home through the city streets, but I didn't see any of it. I was trapped in my own head, replaying that conversation, and the conversation with my partner, and the conversation with my editor. It was a chain reaction, and I was starting to realize that the first link in that chain was the night my son came to me for help. I got back to my empty apartment. The silence was heavier than ever before. I sat on the gray sofa where Nova had sat. I looked at the window. It wasn't raining tonight. The city was just a collection of cold, indifferent lights. And for the first time, with no one left to validate me, with no theories to hide behind, I allowed myself to face the truth. I had been wrong. Not just a little bit wrong. Catastrophically, fundamentally, soul-crushingly wrong. My son's pain was real. My partner's pain was real. My pain was real. And my entire intellectual framework, the philosophy that had guided my life and my career, had failed to account for any of it. It was a system for explaining the world, but it was useless for living in it. It had given me a career, but it had cost me a family. I sat there for hours as the night deepened. The full weight of my arrogance, my cold, clinical dismissal of my own child's suffering, came crashing down on me, and I finally understood what that look on Nova's face was, right before he walked out of my life. It wasn't anger or hate. It was grief. He was mourning the loss of his mother, and he had done it right in front of me. The days that followed were a blur. My life, once so structured and purposeful, became a formless void. I had no articles to write, no partner to talk to, no friend to call. The silence in my apartment was no longer just an absence of sound. It was an active presence. It mocked me. I'd wake up in the morning, and the first thing I'd feel was this crushing weight on my chest. For the first time, I understood what people meant by despair. It wasn't a sharp pain, but a dull, constant ache, a gray filter over everything. I tried to distract myself. I went to museums, but I couldn't focus on the art. I went to the library, but I couldn't read. The words just swam on the page. All I could do was think. My mind, which I had always considered my greatest asset, had become my personal torture chamber. I replayed the conversation with Nova over and over again, every word, every gesture. I remembered the hopeful, desperate look in his eyes when he first started talking, and the way it died when I began my analysis. I had taken his raw, human pain and treated it like a bug under a microscope. I classified it, labeled it, and explained it away until it was no longer his pain, but a data point in my grand theory of everything, my intellectual integrity, as Sarah had called it. What a joke. It was intellectual cowardice. I was so terrified of any feeling that didn't fit neatly into my worldview that I pathologized it. My son came to me because he was drowning, and I explained to him the socio-historical context of water. One afternoon, desperate for some kind of human connection, any kind, I did something I hadn't done in over a decade. I called my ex-husband, Mark, Nova's father. Our divorce had been amicable on the surface, but emotionally messy. We were just too different. I saw the world as a system of power dynamics to be dismantled. He saw it as a collection of individuals trying their best. He was a history teacher, grounded in facts and human stories. I found him frustratingly apolitical. He found me exhausting. I didn't even know if he would answer, but he did on the second ring. His voice was exactly the same, calm, steady. I didn't know what to say. I just started talking, and it all came spilling out. The column, my partner leaving, Sarah's dismissal, and finally the horrible truth of what I had done to Nova. I wasn't making excuses. I wasn't framing a narrative. I just laid the ugly facts out on the table. He listened patiently, without interrupting. He let the silence hang for a moment after I finished. I expected him to say, "I told you so," or to take some satisfaction in my downfall. But he didn't. He just sighed, a deep, weary sound. "I'm sorry to hear all that, Everly. I really am. But I can't say I'm surprised." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice small. "About Nova," he said. "You finally did it. You finally managed to analyze all the humanity out of him." His words were blunt, but not unkind. They were just true. "He called me, you know," Mark continued, "the night after he talked to you." My heart stopped. "He did?" "Yeah. He was a mess. Said he felt like he'd just lost his mom. He said he finally understood that you would never be able to see him as just a person. He would always be a gender to you." I flinched. "A gender, not a son?" Mark went on. "I told him what I always knew. Your ideology is a fortress, Everly. It protects you, but it also traps you. And there's no room in there for anyone else. Not really." We talked for a while longer. He told me Nova was doing okay. He'd thrown himself into his work. He was quiet, but he was resilient. Mark had told him to just focus on building a life for himself, on his own terms. Before we hung up, Mark said something that stuck with me. "You know, for all your theories about men and power," he said, "you've never understood the simple terror of being a young man in this world, the fear of being useless, the fear of being invisible and unloved. It's not a privilege, Everly. It's a burden, and your son tried to share that burden with you, and you told him it wasn't real." After that call, something inside me broke for good. It was the last wall of my self-defense, the final lingering idea that I was somehow the victim in all of this. I wasn't. I was the architect of my own isolation. The world hadn't turned against me. I had turned against the world, or at least the messy human parts of it that didn't fit my theories. The next few weeks were spent in a state of quiet reflection. I started to clean out my apartment, not just tidying up, but a deep purge. I boxed up a lot of my books, the dense academic texts on social theory. They looked different to me now, not like sources of wisdom, but like stacks of bricks. The very bricks I had used to build my fortress. I put them in storage. I didn't want to look at them anymore. I started walking through the city, not with a destination in mind, but just to watch people. I saw men and women on their lunch breaks laughing. I saw fathers pushing strollers. I saw elderly couples holding hands. I saw teenagers on awkward first dates. I saw life. Messy, complicated, unanalyzed life. I had spent so much of my time writing about humanity in the abstract that I had forgotten to be a part of it. I realized that my pursuit of a perfectly just and equitable world had made me unjust and inequitable to the people closest to me. I demanded empathy on a societal scale, but I failed to practice it on a personal one. The hypocrisy of it was staggering. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't just live in this state of regret forever. I had to try to make amends, not for me, but for him. He deserved an apology, even if he never wanted to see me again. Apologizing was not something I was good at. In my world, apologies were often seen as a sign of weakness, a concession of ideological ground. But this wasn't about ideology. This was about a mother and a son. I couldn't call him. He wouldn't answer. A text felt too cheap, too easy to ignore. So I decided to write him an email. It felt formal, but it also felt right. It would allow him to read it in his own time, without the pressure of an immediate response. I sat at my kitchen table for 3 days, writing and rewriting it. My first drafts were terrible. They were full of explanations, justifications. I was wrong, but here's why I thought what I thought. It was still about me. I deleted them all and started again. This time, I just wrote the truth. I started with Dear Nova, not hi or hey. It felt important to be formal, to show respect for the distance between us. I told him I was sorry. 2 simple words that were the hardest I've ever had to write. I didn't make any excuses. I didn't mention my work or my partner or anything else that had happened to me. That was my mess, not his. I specifically addressed the things I had said that night. I wrote, "You came to me with your pain, and I dismissed it. I called it entitlement and privilege. I was wrong. Your feelings were real and valid. And as your mother, my only job in that moment was to listen and to offer you comfort. And I failed. Completely." I wrote about how I had hidden behind my theories because I was too arrogant to face a simple human truth that I couldn't explain. I told him that he had every right to be angry and to keep his distance, that I wasn't asking for forgiveness or for things to go back to the way they were. I just wanted him to know that I knew I had failed him. The last paragraph was the most difficult. I wrote, "You deserved a mother that night, and you got a theorist. That is the great regret of my life. I hope that one day you can find the happiness and connection you deserve. I love you." I signed it, Mom. I read it over about 50 times. It wasn't eloquent. It wouldn't win any literary awards, but it was honest. With my heart pounding in my chest, I hit send. The moment it was gone, I felt a strange mix of terror and relief. I had done the only thing I could do. The rest was up to him. I spent the next few days in a state of suspended animation. Every buzz of my phone made me jump. Every notification sound was a potential verdict. I expected nothing, or rather, I prepared myself for nothing. For the silence to just continue, now punctuated by my final, unanswered plea. After 4 days, I had almost given up hope. I was sitting by my window, watching the sunset. My laptop chimed, a new email. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely use the trackpad. The sender was Nova. The subject line was blank. I clicked it open. The body of the email contained only a single sentence. It wasn't what I had hoped for, but it was more than I deserved. It wasn't absolution. It wasn't a reunion. It was just a fragile, uncertain beginning. The email said, "Thank you for the apology, Mom. I need some more time." I read it again and again. Time. He needed time. He hadn't said no. He hadn't told me to leave him alone forever. He had acknowledged me. I leaned my forehead against the cool glass of the window, and for the second time in years, I cried. But this time, it wasn't tears of self-pity or frustration. It was tears of grief. Yes, for the mother I had failed to be. But there was something else mixed in there too. A tiny, fragile seed of hope. I don't know what will happen with my son. The bridge between us is in ruins, and maybe it can never be fully rebuilt. The cracks might always be there. My career is gone. My relationship is over. My old certainties have turned to dust. My life is no longer a success story I wrote myself. It's a cautionary tale. I sit in my quiet apartment, and I'm not a writer or a feminist or a theorist anymore. I'm just a woman who is learning, far too late, how to listen. And I'm waiting. I'm giving my son the time he needs, the space he deserves. I spend my days trying to become the person he can one day talk to again. I was so busy trying to deconstruct the world that I deconstructed my own family. And now I'm just trying to pick up the pieces, one by one.